Hi, I'm Matt with Main Street Medina, and welcome to another edition of Medina Minute. Today we're here at the historic Farmers Exchange in Southtown, and we're going to meet some faces and some friends from around town. Come on in and join me. Good morning. Today we're here with Brian Feron, president of the Medina County Historical Society. Good morning, Brian. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Certainly, I want to talk more about the Historical Society and the amazing work that you guys are doing, especially in the McDowell-Phillips house. But we want to learn a little more about you first. So tell me, now, are you a lifelong resident of Medina?
Yes, I was born and raised in Medina,
Yeah.
and grew up in Lafayette Township on Ryan Road, and went to Medina High School, and then the Ohio State University.
Yeah. What brought your parents here, or how did they end up here?
After the war, my father served in the China-Burma India Theater, which is a CBI theater, where he learned a lot of the telephone, radio, and equipment that the Army was using. And because the equipment was AT&T equipment, basically, his dream after the war was to go work for American Telephone and Telegraph. And that's exactly what he did. Although my mother grew up in Spencer and my father grew up in Penfield, just outside of Wellington. But they decided Medina was going to be their home when they married in 1948 because the bus line ran into Cleveland. They had an upstairs apartment in a house on Vine Street in the Irish section of town, they used to say.
Oh, really?
So you could walk, you had the Hungarian, the Irish, and
in Medina?
Yeah, and the Catholic Church was right there on Liberty Street. So it was a short walk to everything they needed. And yeah, they joked about that for a long time. But my father rode the bus into Cleveland and worked for AT&T his whole career.
So that really cool, like, downtown mini skyscraper.
Yes.
All right, cool.
And then eventually he ended up over with AT&T Long Lines on Wolf Ledges in Akron, but he enjoyed his career a great deal. But he also was in real estate. He had a real estate license early on with Art Zay, and back in the 60s they helped develop a lot of the Ryan Road area where we actually grew up.
Sure.
And my father enjoyed real estate a great deal. When he retired from AT&T, he formed his own real estate company on Lafayette Road until the time of his death. And so he really enjoyed people in the real estate business.
What was it like growing up in Medina as a kid? I mean, I'm not giving away your age, but I'm thinking it was probably a little bit different than it is today.
Growing up in the 60s and 70s, let's say, well, we always went uptown. You never went downtown. You went uptown to Medina. And for us, that meant riding our bicycles from Ryan Road up to here.
Okay.
So that would mean a daily bicycle route, or sometimes we come to town. We had paper routes, so we always had to be home in time in the afternoon to do the Gazette paper route on Ryan Road. That was in my family for many years. It just passed from one brother, sister down the line. And we took care of all the customers on Ryan Road. I can still name most of them by the houses. So,
how many brothers and sisters did you have?
I had 3 brothers and 2 sisters.
Okay.
So 6 children total, and that was about an average size family back then. Most of the families we grew up with had 4 to 6 more children.
Yeah. So growing up in the city, pretty much everything that you ever needed, you got here in the square.
We could go to Ziegler's and get just about anything. We went to Allison's Shoe Store, which was out in the Medina Shopping Center, which was really the big modern shopping center.
Yeah.
Always stopped at Rickard's for fresh donuts on the west side of the square.
All right.
And you know, before we had freezers and such at home, over by Tebbets, there was a public food locker. So my mother, growing up on a farm, often her siblings would split a hog or a beef, and you would keep your meat in the public locker, and you went to retrieve it when you wanted it, and you brought it home. My mother had the same refrigerator. It was a 1947 model, and up to the day she died, and that same refrigerator was in our kitchen.
Oh my gosh, that's cool.
It was a good old GE that never failed. But it had a very small freezer.
The shopping center at that time, that was kind of the edge of town, wasn't it?
Oh, yes. It was.
Was it just farm beyond that?
Yes. There was Joe Ream's farm, which was out where the new Kmart Super K was built. That was big news in town.
Yeah.
But there was Fisher's at the south end of the strip and A&P at the north end. and there was a Security Federal Bank in the middle. That's where my parents
So
banked.
two grocery stores in that shopping
Yes.
center.
Mhm.
Interesting.
Yes, it was Woolworths was there with
Yeah.
Paul the parrot in the back of the store, which you always had to go visit because it would talk to you.
All right.
I mean, I just remember all these little things
Yeah.
as children that my mother, living out in the country, she
Sure.
didn't last too long without a second car because
Yeah.
once my father had his car, she said, I'm not going to live all the way out there with all these kids and no automobile. So she eventually got an automobile, and we would come into town, always stopping by Farmers Exchange
Yeah.
to see the trucks on the big hoist.
Oh,
that
okay.
we would say, Mom, stop! That truck is jacked way up in the air,
Dumping out the grain and stuff.
dumping out the grain, and we just thought that was the most fascinating thing to see.
Yeah.
And we of course didn't quite understand all the reasons for it. We just thought it was really cool to see a truck lifted up like
Yeah.
that.
So growing up, did you kind of grow up on a farm?
Well, my mother grew up on a dairy farm in Spencer,
Okay.
and my cousins to this day still operate the adjacent farms. So
Oh,
she
cool.
grew up in a dairy farm environment. My father had a small farm, but during the war, his parents moved into Wellington,
Okay.
and my grandfather worked at the Sterling Foundry during the war. He was one of the old men working with mostly
Yeah.
women, which in my father's letters home, he was always asking his father what's going on at the foundry and are the women getting along any better. So there was just a
Really?
whole comedy of things reading in his war letters, which I didn't discover till well after my mother had passed away.
Yeah.
But here was a treasure trove of his letters from 5 years in the service I never knew existed.
Oh, wow.
So I got to know my father indirectly through his writings.
Yeah.
But anyway, the dairy farm was a pretty active part of my mother's life.
Okay.
Although she was not a farm girl, she was the house girl.
Yeah.
Her sister was the one who milked the cows. My mother dusted and cleaned the inside of the farmhouse.
Smart woman.
So,
So how did you meet your lovely wife, Carol? Was she from Medina as well?
no, she grew up in Independence and moved to
Okay.
Medina in the early 80s. And we actually met at church. St. Francis Xavier is our home parish, and I was born, raised, baptized in that parish.
Mm-hmm.
And when they built a new gym, they had a volleyball set up in the.
Okay.
And this one lady in our parish cornered me one day when I was ushering mass. Said, "Are you married yet?" And I said, "No." She says, "That doesn't. I'm forming a singles group." She goes, "There's too many unmarried people in this parish." So she did. And of those, the brief couple of years where we had a singles club,
Yeah.
3 marriages came from that
That's
organization, and we played volleyball together, and the 3 marriages are still intact.
Really?
Which is remarkable.
Yeah.
And when Father Hollis married us, he said, "How amazing to meet in church, never been married, and now to celebrate the sacrament together." He goes,
Yeah.
"This is so cool for him."
That's
He
neat.
thought that was really interesting. So we got to know each other very well through that,
Yeah.
and dated for almost 7 years. So
Oh,
it was
wow,
not a
okay.
quick romance, but
Yeah.
I was in the meantime had a job in Pittsburgh, which pulled me from Medina for about a year and a half.
Okay.
And but we rekindled our romance, and the rest is
Here
history.
we are. So you grew up in Medina. What kept you here?
Well, I think the love of the town. I was
Okay.
very involved in Key Club in high school, which kind of whet my appetite for a lot of the community and service type projects.
Sure.
We learned how to decorate the gazebo from the pioneers of the gazebo.
If you ever want to take it back over, let me know.
the community design committee and some of the older gentlemen were saying, "Now pay attention, boys. We're not going to be around forever. We want to show you how this is done." So Elmer Zarni was one of them.
Sure.
And,
Oh my gosh.
So I remember that lesson just like it happened. And so
Yeah,
when
really.
I graduated from Ohio State, came back, I don't think I was home for a day or two. Mike Morris called me and said, "Hey, time to join the JCs. It's just like Key Club, but we get to drink beer." So I said, "Hey, I'm
You're
in."
in. Yeah, I'm in.
So anyway, we joined the JCs
Okay.
and met a lot of great people, had a lot of fun. And we, of course, took on the project of decorating the square, and we followed the same exact pattern. I wrote the project plan up that I think they were still using up to a few years ago about
Okay.
how many linear feet of roping, bows, tree
Yeah.
stand, all that stuff. And that was very rewarding, but JCs make you leave at age 40.
Okay.
So,
All right.
but I went on to other service organizations.
Yeah.
So-
So do you think your love of growing up here, is that kind of how you became involved in history and your love of history, and especially local history?
I think so. My history teacher at high school was Karen Schmidt, and she had a very entertaining history style in her teachings, and she whet my appetite. My father always talked about history. We would take Sunday drives as a family in the station wagon, because not only as a realtor, but he liked to see what was going on, and he would talk about various historic things.
Oh, cool.
He was active in the political parties, and so I was pounding campaign stakes and hearing political speeches at a very young age. And so I think we were aware of our surroundings maybe a little bit more. Of course, going to parochial school too for the first 8 grades kind of forms your the Catholic theology of giving to others and helping others. I think that was definitely a firm foundation, not only in faith, but in your service to others.
Sure.
And so it kind of flowed naturally from Key Club to JC's, and then I was invited to participate in a Rotary Group Study Exchange team to South Korea in 1984. It was a fascinating trip. And when I returned, I was asked to join the Medina Rotary Club, and I did so. So I was in there for 35 years or so.
How did you get involved with the Historical Society then?
One of the board members, Helen Waite, called me up one day and said,
long-time family name.
Oh my goodness, yeah, her and Ralph were fixtures in town. And she said, you know, we have this opening on our board. We've known you've been active. She goes, would you consider coming to a board meeting just to see what it was all about?
Yeah.
And we met in the basement of the John Smart House on some flimsy old card tables, and I heard a little bit about it. I was, of course, fascinated by the museum. I had actually never been in the Munson House when it was the first home of the County Historical Society, but I had joined the board at the John Smart House.
Nice.
And I think from that point on, I was very interested in learning more about the history. I've always had an interest in antiques, you know, so it was just kind of fun mirroring those two things together. And so one thing led to another, and I've just been very involved in history ever since.
Now you're in charge of it.
I didn't know it was going to turn into all that, but you know, they were great mentors. You know, Tom Hilberg, Joanne King are excellent curators that help teach more of the administrative and behind the scenes museum work. It isn't all about just show and tell. You know, there's a lot of behind the scenes work to properly catalog and display a collection and preserve it.
Yeah.
You know, we're the stewards of these items. We're only the placeholder stewards. We're not,
we
we don't own it. We can't sell it. You know, we are just entrusted to preserve items that people donate and want to see preserved for future.
Yeah. I'm curious, you said you're interested in antiques. Do you collect anything specific?
I've had a few over the years. I restored a few. Even in high school, I restored my first big dresser, was my grandmother's, and that was my first taste of really refinishing a large piece.
Yeah.
And since then, in my old house on South Court Street, I had quite a few antique, just kitchen and typical items you might see in a century home, and that kind of whetted my appetite. Of course, eventually I bought an antique truck too, which was really kind of cool. I still like just looking at it. You know, it's not as easy to drive, but it certainly is nice to look at, and just kind of, it's just one of those weird things that
bring it out to the cruising.
I hope to. I tried working on it the other day, so I have to get it in a little bit better shape.
Yeah.
But I've always had an interest in old cars. That was the other stop we made my mother on Baxter Street. A man named Ron Collins always refinished and bought and sold old vehicles right at the curve on Baxter Street.
All right.
And so we always had to slow down by Ron Collins' house to see what he had on the front lawn. And I know it's all these little weird things, but that's what we did for entertainment. Cool. Yeah. And I always loved every Medina parade, whether it was old-fashioned cars, the Chippewa Lake Parade. I mean, it just was a fascination I've always had.
Yeah. How, you retired, what, 2 years ago?
About a year and a half, January of 2020.
Okay, so about a year and a half, your life has been consumed, you and your family. You've been consumed with this McDowell-Phillips house project that we, documented. There's been a lot of talk about it in town. What has that meant to you to be the steward of that history in that home? Well,
it's an extremely important role, and one that we kind of weren't prepared to take on immediately. But once the offer was made, here, good luck. There's no training guide, there's no nothing. But when we were approached by Miriam Phillips to sell that house to us, we were just overwhelmed. Yeah. We said, how in the world are we going to raise that kind of money? We know it needed work, yet I looked at this project as a really defining moment in our organization's history.
Sure, absolutely.
Not too often do you get an opportunity like this, and I think Joanne said it best. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for us to preserve even a larger section of history, not only local, statewide, but nationally, based on the contents. She already knew what was in the home by working with Drew Phillips for many years. The Phillips family had already donated the Albany sleigh and carriage, and we had those items restored and were in our collection. We had no idea we would eventually own the whole house, barns, and everything in between.
Everything in them.
So it's just been I think a very defining project, not only in my life but my wife's life, because she is, as a treasurer, absorbs so much of the admin work and the treasury work. You know, fundraising, as you know, is never easy, and there's a lot of people you have to have involved in the process, and thank you notes, and making sure the deposits are all registered appropriately, and reporting to the board where we're at, and then of course paying the bills. But the important thing is, you know, she's been a great partner right by my side, and this has been truly. I'm more passionate because I was born and raised here. She was born and raised in Independence, doesn't quite have all the connections, but she gets very enthusiastic about certain elements of the house, and has certainly been right by my side working.
Yeah. What do you think is next for you? I mean, you had a career for years and years and years. You retired. Now you've been hands-on, almost 24/7 working on this house. I don't think you're ever going to walk away. But when it's time to say, okay, this project is done, are you and Carol going to take a trip? Are you going to get the heck out of town for some time?
We hope to. We've always planned a lot of vacations. Of course, COVID stopped a lot of that in its tracks. We visited Ireland. We still have many other states we want to visit. We love road trips, or we fly out to a destination, rent a car, and drive back home, which is really kind of a fun way of doing it, and it really helps take your time and not waste all your time behind a windshield. You know, and yet there are so many states. I mean, New Mexico's next on our horizon. We've never been down that way. We've never been up to the upper Northwest. We'd love to take an Alaskan cruise. I'd be happy taking a Mississippi River cruise. I think that would be cool. I think that would be very cool. And you just, we've been on the Lewis and Clark Trail, we've been to the Dakotas and all those areas, been to Maine and New England many times. She loves Williamsburg. That's one of our favorite cities to visit again. And again, it's that embodiment of history that I think just everywhere we go, no matter what town, no matter how big or small, we find the local historical society and check it out.
That's really cool.
You know, and of course, even I didn't know there was a museum for the Pony Express. There is, and I think it's in Missouri, if I recall. Missouri, or Pony Express only lasted 18 months, but it has this big museum dedicated to that whole project and what it could have been had it not been for the telegraph, which just pretty much wiped it out. And it's just an amazing.
That's really cool.
Little museums. I mean, there's just so many interesting car museums. You know, just of course the presidential libraries and mansions. We were just at the McKinley Library about 2 weeks ago, and it was nice visiting that. Of course, we have Lakeview Cemetery right here in our backyard.
It's all about the history.
It is. A lot of it becomes that. We're not beach people, you know.
No, you're very fortunate that your spouse also appreciates what you do.
Yes,
you guys
I am.
Can do
because,
it together.
You know, we don't care to sit at a beach and read a book. That's not my idea of vacation. If I'm gone 2 or 3 days, that's enough vacation. Now I'll get back to work. But we'll take some longer trips, I suspect, once things lighten up a little bit more.
Well, very cool.
We love the old resorts like the Greenbrier. We were supposed to be at French Lick in Indiana this year, and now it's postponed to probably this fall. But,
You'll get there. You'll get there. Brian, thank you so much for your time and sharing a little bit about you and the history, and we look forward to seeing what happens with McDowell-Phillips House when it's finally open. People can tour it and see all the hard work that you and all the volunteers have done.
Well, I hope our next phase pleases our donors as much as it has already. We would love to make the property and grounds more accessible for small gatherings eventually, and that's our next phase of planning. So if we accomplish that in the next year or two, I'll be very happy.
All right. Well, if you're happy, we're happy.
Well, Medina is a great place to have this kind of town. Just doesn't come along every day.
That's true.
It's really a blessing between all your work and all the CDC's work to see the outcome. Because I remember what it looked like in the 60s.
In the 60s and 70s.
Not something you'd be bragging about very much, believe me.
All right, Brian, thank you so much. Thanks for joining us today.
You're welcome.